My name is Sarah. I would also like to say that I have Joyce with me in the room, and she's going to help filter any questions that come through the chat. Um, Today's class is very fun. We are doing these beautiful royal icing cookies that are Easter egg inspired. So these are great if you have a business and you want to sell these cookies. They're great for your dessert table for your Easter celebration, or even just to do for fun. So we can go to the overhead camera and I'll start going through some of the supplies that we are working with today. As you can see here, these are some of the samples of the cookies that we'll be making. I have a electric mixer with a paddle attachment. This is just a silicone mat that I like to lay on my surface just because it just keeps everything clean and it's easy to wipe. I have some warm water. I have little bowls, some oval shaped sugar cookies. I have a scribe tool, and this is to help smooth out the royal icing, get rid of any air bubbles that you may see. If you don't have one of these, you can always use a toothpick. I have the pastel food color gel. This is very new from Satin, and it's very cool. Let's see what else. I have a spatula. This is going to help us scrape the sides of the bowl when we're making our royal icing. I have some spoons, 1 cup measuring cup so that we can measure our powdered sugar, and some tablespoons to measure our meringue powder. Let's see. I have plastic wrap. This is so that I can keep my royal icing covered when we're not using it. And of course, meringue powder. And I also have powdered sugar. So in today's class, I wanted to show everyone how to make homemade royal icing using meringue powder rather than using a ready-to-use or using the royal icing mix. We do offer the ready-to-use, which is great. And I've done classes with that before, and I've also done classes with the royal icing mix that we also offer. So I thought we could do a class where we make it from scratch, and it's very simple. All it requires is powdered sugar, meringue powder, and some warm water. So what's nice about the meringue powder is that normally when you make homemade royal icing, you make it with egg whites, but with meringue powder, you don't have to worry about any contamination from the eggs because there's just, we're not actually using raw egg whites. So that's always good as well. But we can get started and we'll start making the recipe. You'll notice on the side of the pail that there's going to be a royal icing recipe, and it makes about 2 cups. And then once we make it, we're going to be coloring it with the pastel food color gels to make the nice, pretty colors for our cookies. Okay, so to get started, the first step is to add 4 cups of powdered sugar to the mixing bowl. So that's what we're going to do first. So I have some powdered sugar here. To make sure that your powdered sugar is nice and level in your cup. And I'm just going to put it in my bowl. So that's 1 cup. It's 2 cups. Yeah, I'm going to move the mixer closer once we start mixing. This is the 3rd cup. Let me know also in the chat if you guys are new to making royal icing or working with royal icing. Okay, and then this is the 4th cup. Okay, so we have our sugar. And then next we will add our meringue powder. Okay, so the meringue powder we need, I believe it says 3 tablespoons. So we'll do 3 tablespoons of meringue powder. All right, so a lot of people are new to the royal icing, so you came to a good class. I'll try to answer as many questions that you guys might have or share as many tips and tricks. Okay, so 3 tablespoons of meringue powder. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to bring my mixer closer into the screen. Oopsies. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mix this on low speed with hopefully without any powder flying everywhere and just to get it combined.
Does the meringue powder have an expiration date?
Yes, someone asked if the meringue powders have expiration dates. You will see on the side of the pail, there is a best before little section and you'll see where when it will expire.
I'm not seeing one on here.
If you're not seeing it, you can contact us and we can run through the batch number, but there should be an expiration date on somewhere on the pail. It could be on the lid. It could be on the side of the pail. Someone asked if royal icing works well with vegetable food coloring. I'm assuming you mean like it's a natural food coloring. I don't see why not. The only thing that you'll want to be careful of with certain food colorings is if you always want to use a water-based food color when working with royal icing because there's no oil in this. And if you're using a liquid-based food color, you want to make sure that you're adding it while your royal icing is still in a stiff consistency because royal icing is very sensitive to water content. So that's why I like to use the gel food coloring. I think someone just asked if there's a recipe for the royal icing. So the recipe is located on the side of the pail for the meringue powder, or you can always go to satinice.com under meringue powder and we provide the recipe there as well. But right now we're doing the recipe, which is 4 cups of powdered sugar and 3 tablespoons of meringue powder. And we just combined it through into the bowl. And now what we're going to do, we're going to add some water, and I'm using some warm water. Our goal for right now when we're mixing the royal icing is we're going to get it to a thick consistency. You never want to, when you're making it homemade, get it directly to a thin consistency because it's important that this kind of whips up nice and fluffy first because it's going to get a really beautiful pure white color. So that's why we want to I'm going to add about 4 to 5 tablespoons of water to this batch right now. And you're going to see that it's going to become more of like a thick texture and kind of almost look pasty at first. And as we continue to mix, it's going to become really fluffy and bright white. So that's what I'm going to start doing now. I'm going to add 4 to 5 tablespoons of water one at a time. Okay, so you can start to see that it's really starting to come together and it kind of looks a little pasty, a little lumpy right now. I'm just going to make sure that I scrape the bottom of the pail and the sides. When you're making royal icing or royal icing in general, as it's exposed to air, it does dry and it starts to set pretty fast. And that's what you want with royal icing. That's why people use it for cookies. So you can stack them and you can package them up. But while you're mixing it, you just want to make sure that there's not too much stuck to the side so that doesn't get all dry and crusty. And you just want to make sure everything is getting well combined. So I just want to make sure that I'm scraping the bottom of the pail, and I'm going to continue to mix this until it starts to combine more. Okay, so you can start to see it's coming together more and more. Just gonna give it one more little stir. And then I'm just going to let it mix for a few minutes. And we'll probably have to give it another scraping. But you can see the texture right now. It's kind of like very hard to pick up with the spatula, but as we mix it, it's going to become fluffier and smoother. And that's the meringue powder doing the work. All right, so I'm going to turn this back on to like medium speed. Okay, we do want to mix it more, but you can start to see that the texture is starting to change. I can easily pick it up out of the bowl. So it's starting to become a little lighter. And you can see that it's a nice bright white color. I just want to make sure that everything's combining well. So I'm going to give it a good scrape. And then I'm going to mix it again for another couple minutes.
We use it on cakes.
Someone asked if you could use the royal icing on cakes, and yes, I wouldn't use it to cover a cake, but it's often used for nice little details on the side of the cake. You'll see like a lot of string work or like little dots and details on the sides of cakes, and a lot of times that's used with royal icing. Okay, so you can really see now, like even the volume of it increased. It looks like there's more in the bowl and it's looking good. I'm going to mix it for a little bit more. This process is important. And I'm just going to add a little bit more water to my bowl just to make sure I want it to be, I don't want it to be very thick that it's too hard to mix in the colors. We're going to turn it into a flood consistency once it's in these bowls and when we start to color it. So I'm just going to add a little bit more water so that it's a little bit softer. Yes, we used 4 cups of powdered sugar and 3 tablespoons of royal icing. And if you have the meringue powder pail, you'll see the recipe you can reference. I probably added about 5 to 7 tablespoons of water because I whipped it up to a thick consistency. And now we're going to transfer the royal icing. Look how nice the consistency is. It's nice and fluffy now. I don't want this to dry out in the bowl, so I'm going to transfer the royal icing between these 5 small bowls that I have, and then we're going to add color and make it to a flood consistency, and we'll start decorating the cookies. So royal icing is a beautiful white icing, and as it's exposed to air, it will start to crust over and become hard. Not too hard that you can't bite into it, but hard enough that you can stack the cookies and package them and box them up without getting messed up. And you do want to let your cookies dry out in the open and exposed air. I would say for at least 12 hours. You really want to make sure that they are completely set before moving them too much because you don't want to crack the icing or packaging them. Okay, so I divvied up the icing into 5 bowls because I want to showcase the 5 different pastel food color gels that we have. And like I said, I'm doing this so that I can cover up these bowls and make sure that they don't get crusted. Okay, so I have my 5 bowls of icing. Now I'm going to work one by one and getting them to the right consistency. So I have cling wrap here, and I'm just going to cover the tops of each one to make sure that no air is getting to these, the ones that I'm not working with, because royal icing dries when exposed to air. So if you ended up having leftover royal icing and you want to store it, you can always store it in an airtight container. But I would recommend putting a layer of saran wrap on top, directly on top of the icing before closing the lid to your airtight container to make sure that there's no air getting to it. And you would just store it at room temperature. I would say a lot of people store their royal icing room temperature for 1 to 2 weeks. Okay, so now we're going to make a flooding consistency for the royal icing. So there's different consistencies you might hear of. You might hear of piping consistency. People might say a thick consistency or an outline consistency. And then there's a flood consistency. The thick consistency is something like what we have right now. You might be able to do piping like dollops or like flowers and petals and leaves, because a lot of people do things on parchment paper. They let it dry and then they transfer it over to decorate cakes with or to use as decorations on top of their cookies. And then slightly thinner than a thick consistency is an outline consistency, and you can use that to outline different parts of your cookie. So today we are doing wet on wet techniques with the cookies. And what I mean by that is when we decorate the cookie, we are going to flood it with one color and then add designs with other colors that are the same exact consistency, but while the base layer is still wet, so that those other colors are gonna kind of just sink into the base color. They're not gonna look raised. And so what's important is that we get all of our bowls of royal icing to be a very similar consistency. And I'm aiming for a consistency that's similar to a flood, but not something that's going to run off the cookie, because we're not making an outline consistency. We're only making one consistency today. And when people talk about consistencies, they might say, oh, I'm aiming for a 10-second flood or a 14-second flood. And we'll start to talk about that as I start adding water to this. I will say that royal icing is very sensitive to water. So you might even see some people in videos using a water spray bottle to spray a small amount of water on top of their royal icing, because it's just giving it that little bit, because too much water will take it to be too thin, and then you'll have to work with more powdered sugar to get it back to a consistency that you want. So you always want to just start with a small amount at a time. So I have a tablespoon here, but I'm not filling that as a tablespoon. I'm just putting a little bit of water in here, and I'm going to just do a few drops, and I'm going to start mixing it to see what consistency we get. Also, before I get it too thin, I'm going to start adding the food color gels too, because any extra water content that you're adding to it will aid in it getting to a thinner consistency. So that's also why I like to use gel food color, because they're a thicker consistency, so it won't mess with the end consistency of whatever medium you're using. So I have the pastel food color gels here. These are brand new. And what's great about these is that food color gels are often very, very pigmented, and Satin Ice food color gels are. So we created a pastel food color gel where the max concentration that you're going to get from this is a pastel shade. So if you use a drop, you're going to get a very, very pale pink, but the more drops, the most concentration of color that you'll get is a strong pastel pink. So you'll get all different shades of pastel when using these pastel food color gels. So I'm just going to start with a few drops because I just want a nice, pretty light pink. Because it's always, especially with smaller batches of icing, it's so hard to get a pastel shade with a regular food color gel because they're so concentrated. A lot of people will have to use like a toothpick or something. What's nice about the pastels is that you can just add drop by drop, and you don't necessarily have to worry about it getting too dark, because like I said, the max concentration is a pastel pink. So like right now we have a really pretty blush pink. I'm just going to add a few more drops. And then I'm going to add some more water to get it to the consistency that we want. Okay, so now I'm just going to continue to add really small amounts of water because we wanted to get it to a thinner consistency that we're going to be able to just pipe it and it's going to just kind of flood the cookie on its own. So it's still not thin enough. So I'll add a little bit more. And then as this gets to a thinner consistency, I'm going to explain by what people mean when they talk about a 10-second flood or a 13-second flood. And that will help you, once you distinguish what type of flood consistency we're looking at today, that's going to help you know what to look for when you're coloring and making your other icings a thinner consistency. And so the consistency, like I said, what we're aiming for is so that we can like flood the cookie without having an outline consistency. So we want to make it so that it will still flood nicely, but not fall off the cookie because we're not making a border for it to fall into. So let's see right now. So the way that you can figure out what consistency you're working with, you take your spoon and you pour it off, and however many seconds it takes for your glob to kind of flood into the other icing is how many seconds flood royal icing you have. So like I can still see here that this is just now starting to flood into itself. So I'm just that took a little too long. So I'm going to add a little bit more water. Let's see what we're at now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think that was about 8. Let's see again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so this is about an 8 flood consistency. And so I'm going to transfer this now to a piping bag, and then we'll work on the other colors. So now that we know it's around an 8 to 10 second flood, that's what we want to do the other colors because we are doing a wet on wet technique. So we want with the wet on wet technique, you want the colors that you're using to flood into each other. And if one is too thick, you're going to kind of notice it kind of sits on top, or it's not going to want to kind of fall into the other color. Okay, so that's that. And now we can start doing the other colors. So again, I'm just going to start by adding a small amount of water just to kind of make it easier to stir. Now, if you weren't making this a thinner consistency and you wanted to add color, you would just go right ahead and start mixing in your desired color. Okay. Next color I'm going to do is green. So there's no real recipe that someone can give another person for how to get the right flood consistency or something like that, because it depends on how much humidity is in your area. Everyone's going to have to be different for how much water they add. So that's why you have to just use people just say small amount at a time, or like I said earlier, they might use a spray bottle or something to just really do small amounts of water. I will say a lot of work goes into royal icing cookies, and some of the ones you see out there are so intricate and beautiful, and it definitely takes a lot of time for people to complete those. Let's see what we're at now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, we're too thick. We'll add a little bit more. Some people also like to, after they're done mixing it and adding water, because you're stirring so much, you might be incorporating a lot of air. So you'll get air bubbles. So a lot of people like to make their colors and make their consistencies and let it sit for a little while to allow the air bubbles to come up. But we're working in a class today, so we won't be able to do that. This consistency looks good. So I'm just adding this to a piping bag. And now I'm going to do purple. I may not mix all of the colors because I want to have enough time to show you guys designs. So I might start working with just these 3 colors, and then if I have time, I'll mix the others.
Is it better to have the cookies at room temperature or slightly chilled?
So
Ready to take.
someone asked, is it best to have your cookies at room temperature or slightly chilled when you're ready to decorate? I would say definitely room temperature. Everything is room temperature when it comes to royal icing, because you'll also want to let them dry at room temperature in open air. And a lot of people, if they need their royal icing to dry quicker, they might set it in front of a fan. They might actually put their cookies in a dehydrator. I've never done that before though. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I just need a little bit more water. After I'm done mixing this, I'm going to start getting into some of the techniques, and then if I have some time, I'll mix the other colors. So for today's cookies, we're really going to do simple designs like polka dots or stripes or marbled designs.
What type of cookie dough should you use for the egg?
Someone asked what type of cookie dough should you use for the eggs? Definitely sugar cookie. And I recommend looking up a recipe on Google that is a no spread recipe. There's tons of recipes that will come up, but it's important that, because you don't want your cookies to spread into a different shape that you're not expecting. So definitely look up a no spread sugar cookie recipe. Okay, we're gonna put this into our piping bag. Okay, so I'm gonna get started decorating some cookies. So we want the opening to our piping bags to be not huge. I'm not sure. Someone asked a question, but I didn't see it in time.
Are you to use your royal? Should they be cut out though? Yes, they should be. Are you use your royal really liquid?
I'm not, so right now we're working with what you would call a flood consistency. And like I said before, with the seconds of how long it takes for it to flood into itself, we're about like an 8-10 second flood. And I wanted to make it so that it wasn't too runny, that it's not gonna run off the cookie, because we aren't doing an outline for a barrier today. We're working with all one consistency throughout. So I'm not gonna get super close to the edge because I don't want this to flood off, because we're also gonna add other colors on top of it to make a design. So I'm gonna be careful on how far I go out onto this cookie when decorating it. Because as we're smoothing it out, we can naturally just take it out a little bit further. Like, don't worry how neat you're piping the shape of your cookie, because you can use your scribe tool or your toothpick to help give it shape. So you'll see how much room I left around the edge, just because I don't want this to run off, but I'm going to use my scribe tool and kind of start moving it around, making sure that there's no air bubbles, and kind of moving it in the shape of the cookie. And I'm doing it this way because we aren't doing an outline on the cookie. So I don't want it to overflow on the edge of the cookie. And at this point, when you're starting to decorate and you're doing a wet on wet technique, you want to work somewhat quickly, because you don't want your base layer to start setting up before you start adding your design. So if you're doing a wet on wet technique, you can always still make a border and then flood it in if that works better for you, so you don't have to worry about it flooding over the edge. But for simplicity for today's class, I just wanted to work with one consistency so that we didn't have to make a bunch of different consistencies. Okay, so now I have that color flooded. And now to do a wet on wet technique, I'm going to start with some polka dots. I'm going to cut the tip of the pink, and now I'm just going to start piping directly on top while this layer is still wet. And I'm just going to randomly do some polka dots. And you'll see as you pipe on top, the other color is just going to flow right into the base color because they're the same consistency. And I'm piping it on top while the base layer is still wet. You can do some with some larger polka dots, some smaller. And you can see how it's kind of flooding into itself, so it looks like it's one layer. So now we'll do another one. And we will do green as the base. And I'll start flooding the cookie. Again, I don't want to get too close to the edge because I'm not doing an outline consistency. I'm doing all one flood consistency. We don't want it to run off the side of the cookie. And now I'm just going to use my scribe tool, or like I said, you could use a toothpick and kind of just shape the icing to the oval cookie. This is the same thing that you would do with a cookie icing consistency that's already ready to use in the bottle like we sell. You'll see that at Michael's too. That's the cookie icing is a flood consistency. So you'll do something very similar with that. And as you're working with this, you might see some air bubbles. You can either tap your cookie up and down, that might help kind of pop the air bubbles, or you can use your tool to pop them.
The tool is a scribe.
Yes, the tool I'm using is called a scribe. You can definitely just use a toothpick if you want. Okay, so while this layer is still nice and not dry yet, we're going to go in with another color. So I'm going to take my purple, and this time I'm going to do stripes. So I'm just going to start at one end. And you'll see, like, the more you squeeze, the more royal icing that will come out. The less you squeeze, the thinner it will come out. So you can play around. Like right there, my line broke a little bit, but that's okay. I'm just going to go back in and fill in that gap. But you can see the stripes are flooding in to the cookie. So I'll do another one, and you can even do multiple color stripes. So we'll do that on the next one. The next one I'll flood to be pink. And then for this cookie, we'll do alternating stripes of purple and green. It's coming off. It's one of this tool. So again, I'm just using this tool to kind of move the icing around, make sure that the edges are smooth, make sure it's taking the shape of the cookie okay, again, because we didn't make an outline. And I'm also popping any air bubbles that I see pop up. Okay, so now I'm going to alternate the colors of the stripes. So I'm going to start with green stripes, but I'm just going to leave larger gaps in between so I can go in with the purple. Okay, so we have our green stripes. And then I'll make some purple. Okay. And if you ever need to smooth any of things out, you can always use your tool to do that too. Okay, so next I can show you how to do a marble design, which is very simple, which is this design here. So we can flood with a color. I'm gonna choose pink so that the marble color will show up good. So we're gonna flood the cookie with a pink.
These are beautiful.
Thank you. So again, we use this tool to smooth out the edges of the icing, to kind of move the icing around to take shape of the cookie. And to pop any air bubbles. If we had an outline on our cookies, this flood consistency would just naturally kind of flood up to the outline, and you wouldn't have to worry so much about it taking shape to the cookie nicely. But this is a really nice consistency, but because it's not rolling over the edge, it's kind of holding a puffy look, which is nice. Okay, so now we're going to make a marble design. For that, you don't have to do anything special when you're putting these other colors on. I'm just going to kind of do random dollops and lines. Just doing it with the purple. And then we're going to use our tool to do some swirls, and that's going to create the marble effect. And again, you want to make sure that when you're doing a wet on wet technique like this, that you're moving somewhat quickly, because the royal icing will start to set pretty quickly. So it's a really pretty marble finish. And then if you ever wanted to do designs where it's raised on top, you would just have to wait for your base layer to set. Let's see. This design, I don't know what you call this design with all like the zigzaggy lines, but I'll show you how to make it. I'm not sure what to call this. Maybe you guys know what this design is called, but it's very popular.
Chevron.
Chevron. Thank you. Chevron. I knew that. Okay, so let's do a chevron pattern. And again, we can use all three colors for that at the same time. So I'll do another green cookie. So I'm flooding the cookie in green. And then I'm just going to quickly make this nice and smooth. I think I have to add a little bit more. Okay. Just about. Okay, so now for the chevron pattern, we are going to make stripes. So again, I'm going to do alternating stripes of purple and pink. So I'm going to first do my purple lines, and I'm just going to leave some gaps because I want to leave room to do pink lines too. Okay, so now. And do our pink lines. I'm not just pulling out. I cut this, the tip of this to be a little too wide because I was flooding the cookie with it. So now it's a little tricky to do thinner lines. Okay, so now we have our lines done. So now you're going to take your tool, whatever you're using, a scribe tool or a toothpick, and you're going to just kind of flood through it. You're going to go in one direction, and then you're going to go back up in the other direction. And again, this is also important to do before your icing starts to set. I can tell that my icing is starting to set already. It creates that really pretty design. Does anyone have any questions on the royal? Oh, I just messed up my cookie. Okay, this is a prime example of once you decorate your cookie, I advise you to put it on a tray so that you're not maneuvering it anymore and you can pick up the tray and you're not picking up the actual cookie because you can easily do an indent like I just did. Or if you're moving it too much, the icing could crack as it's drying. So definitely put it on a tray, let it air dry in open air for at least 12 hours before manipulating it or touching it, just to make sure that it's dry. It will differ depending on your climate, how long something's going to take to dry. So just give it time. What else did I want to say? Royal icing. So if I wanted to store this leftover royal icing, I would definitely transfer this over to like a Tupperware or a pail of some kind that has a tight fitting lid. That's an airtight container. And then I would put saran wrap over the icing directly on top, touching it, almost like you would do if you were making pudding, just to make sure there's no air getting to it. And then I would put the airtight top on top. Another thing is when you're storing royal icing is natural, the water from it is naturally going to separate. So just be aware of that. If you do store it in a container and you start to see like water on the sides, that's totally normal. Just stir it back up and you should be good to go. Same as if you store royal icing in a piping bag like this, you might notice some separation. You can kind of just like knead it back together.
Someone's asking what's the difference between meringue powder and royal icing.
Someone asked what the difference is between meringue powder and royal icing. So meringue powder is its own ingredient. So meringue powder is often used as an egg white substitute. It has dried egg whites in it. So meringue powder is used to make meringue topping, like you would use in a on a pie, or you can make meringue cookies, or you use meringue powder to create a royal icing, because if you make a homemade royal icing, it calls for egg whites, and you normally have to whip the egg whites to create a really fluffy texture. But there is always that risk because you're using real egg whites of contamination or anything like that. So that's why meringue powder is often used to make homemade royal icing, because you just put the powder in with the, you just put the meringue powder in with the powdered sugar and mix it up with water and you're good to go. So meringue powder is definitely the easier route to using that to making royal icing. And Satin Ice also does have ready to use royal icing and royal icing mix. So those are also really good options. And there's also cookie icing, which is ready to use, and you just add, you just might have to shake it a little bit and then you can flood a cookie with it.
You need flavoring?
Yes, you can add flavoring. I feel like a lot of times people add lemon You can do vanilla, whichever flavor you like, and whichever flavor is going to pair best with your base of your cookie. Sometimes people use flavored sugar cookies. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Does Satin have any egg-free icing?
Does Satin Ice have any egg-free icings? Well, royal icing, if you're talking about royal icing, no. But the cookie icing does not have egg in it. And then any of our buttercreams and stuff and fondant, that doesn't have egg in it. But royal icing typically will have an egg white in it. Thanks for your tips and tricks. Thank you guys so much for joining. I hope you guys learned some things today, or you worked along with me, or you're going to use this class for future for making some cookies. Did someone ask another question? I saw
Yes,
something.
you would use egg extracts to use. for
Oh,
flavor.
yes. Someone asked, would you use extracts to flavor? Yes, you would use extracts. That's perfectly fine. Again, just do small amounts at a time. I would add the extracts, obviously, when you're mixing it and it's in a thick consistency so that you don't ruin the thin consistency. Any more questions? Okay. Thank you guys again so much for joining, and I hope to see you guys in the next class. So have a great night.